My name is Lauren LeBlanc. I'm the book columnist for the New York Observer, and I'm coming to you from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This has been an exciting opportunity to meet with two terrific amazing authors. I'm really excited today to speak with them. We want to start out by acknowledging that the role that the great indie presses and bookstores who put this book event together. Indie presses have a unique role in the book ecosystem. They find and foster the innovative talents, marginalized voices, and the brilliant debuts. This year, they've not only kept us entertained as we stayed home, but they've also informed us about the most pressing issues in our society. So we'd like to take this moment to thank Bellevue Literary Press and Milkweed Editions for the work that you do. And we'll take a moment now to highlight the beautiful bookshops that put together today's event. You'll see a link in the chat for each bookstore, so please go out and support them. Click the links and support yourself as well by purchasing today's books. Our 9 bookstore partners have been through quite a lot this year, just as much as we all have, between closings and work-altering changes. We've missed them so much. It's been a real hardship to not be able to spend time browsing bookstores. And it only highlights the importance of bookstores by realizing how much we miss them. So in spite of the challenges they faced, those bookstores have continued to discover new amazing books and place them into our hands. So while also continuing to support our local communities by organizing events such as this one. So please, if it's possible, we would encourage you to support them the way that they support us, and go ahead and buy today's books and some more if you're so inclined. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our writers. Aimee Nezhukumatathil is the author of 4 collections of poems, including most recently Oceanics, which was the winner of the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award. Other awards for her writing include fellowships and grants from the Guggenheim Foundations, the National Endowment for the Arts, Pushcart Prizes, Mississippi Arts Council, and the McDowell Colony. Her writing has been anthologized twice in the Best American Poetry series and appears in Poetry, the New York Times Magazine, ESPN, and 10 House. She serves as poetry faculty for the writing workshops in Greece and is professor of English and creative writing in the University of Mississippi's MFA program. Andrew Krivak, our second writer, is the author of 2 previous novels, The Signal Flame, a Chautauqua Prize finalist, and The Sojourn, a National Book Award finalist and winner of both the Chautauqua Prize and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts, and in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, in the shadow of Mount Monadnock, which inspired much of the landscape of the Bear. So I would love to invite Aimee to begin and speak, read for a moment, and then afterwards Angela will speak, and then we're going to have a terrific conversation this evening. So thank you, Aimee.
Yep. Sarah,
Oh, great.
Zoom basically since March. I was telling Andrew, and I still every time always just have one little thing. So happy to be here, and Andrew, congrats on the National Book Award nomination. So exciting. I'm going to read a selection from World of Wonders, and it's going to be on one of my favorite chapters, and this one is, they're all broken down into 28 plants and animals that I love and adore. And they're illustrated by this incredible author named Fumi Nakamura. And I'm going to read to you a selection, just a little piece from my essay on the narwhal. Narwhals are found mainly in the Arctic Ocean, but occasionally a small pod of them wanders into a Canadian fjord. Now, the word narwhal comes from the Old Norse word nar, which means like a corpse, due to the distinctive mottled skin that looks like the spotted color of drowned sailors. Narwhals don't have a dorsal fin, and they have vertebrae in their neck that allow them to do a whale of a double take. The only other whales that share these unique traits are beluga. And narwhals eat cuttlefish, cod, and armhook squid. Nothing too disturbing, right? But it's the way they eat that can be alarming. A narwhal will swim up to its food, very stealthy, like slow and steady, opening its mouth and inhaling like the world's scariest vacuum. And then, in one giant and powerful gulp, it will swallow the unsuspecting animal whole. Did I mention that narwhals like to like to swim upside down? Can you imagine seeing a 3,000-pound narwhal sidling up to you upside down and then slowly starting to open its mouth? Who are these toothy creatures' predators? Orcas and the occasional polar bear sometimes hunt baby narwhals. And when orcas go after an entire pod, the narwhals just dive, dive, dive. They can survive at almost 5,000 feet below sea level. And yet, narwhals are classified as almost threatened because humans hunt them for their teeth and their valuable fat supply. One afternoon in Kansas, my sister and I were riding the school bus back to the doctor's quarters. As we neared home, I saw my mom in our driveway unpacking groceries from the car. A chunky blonde boy on the bus asked if my mom was Chinese. When I said no, she was actually Filipino, he flipped his eyelids inside out. I wanted to just pause. I don't know if kids do that anymore or what, but I'm a kid of the 80s and 70s, and they would just flip their eyes inside out. Sometimes they'd be like, I'm Chinese, but really it was just gross. And anyway, so sometimes people know what I'm talking about, sometimes people don't. They would flip their eyelids. Anyway, I cringed and groaned. I could still picture the greasy, who knows what, jammed under this boy's fingernails. I could still see his belly hanging over his Wrangler jeans as he chortled over his own joke. And then, as if flipping his eyelids wasn't enough, he tugged at the skin at the corner of his eyes and pulled it to his ears. I bet she's Chinese. Her eyes don't even look like yours. Ice. Snow. The white plastic of the milk jugs my mother was carrying in each hand as she smiled at the bus, scanning the faces of all those staring kids for her own. I wanted to dive deep, deep, deep into the darkest of seas so no orcas could find me. I had no sword, and worse, no sharp tongue with which to sass him back. Instead, I just stared straight ahead, gathered up my books, and left without saying goodbye to poor Mr. Johnson, our kindly bus driver. And I'll pause here for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Really appreciate that. Andrew, would you like to read right now?
Sure. Thank you, Aimee. I've seen that done. I've never done it myself. It's pretty gross.
Oh, yeah. I think it was like, yeah, you better say you've never done it yourself.
No, honestly, I have never done that.
I would walk around at recess and do it. So yeah, anyway.
I'm going to read the first, just the first 2 pages, really, of The Bear. It sets the scene, and it was initially when I finally got the novel to where I understood what it would be. It was really these several paragraphs that just cohered for me. So this is The Bear, and it's worth mentioning, there's an epigraph from Ralph Waldo Emerson, speaking of Mount Monadnock and the Transcendentalists. It's from his his essay entitled Nature, but from the second series, not the one everyone reads in it. And he says at the end, "We did not guess its essence until after a long time." The Bear. The last 2 were a girl and her father, who lived along the old eastern range on the side of a mountain they called the mountain that stands alone. The man had come there with a woman when they were young and built a house out of timber, stones pulled from the ground and mortar they made with a mix of mud and sand. It was set halfway up the mountain slope and looked out onto a lake ringed with birch trees and blueberry bushes that ripened in summer with great bunches of fruit the girl and her father would pick as the 2 floated along the shore in a canoe. From a small window in front of the house, the glass, a gift the woman's parents had given to her after having received it themselves from the generation before, so precious a thing had it become as the skill for making it was lost and forgotten. The girl could see eagles catching fish in the shallows of an island that rose from the middle of the lake. and hear the cries of loons in the morning while her breakfast cooked over a hearth fire. In winter, the snows began not long after the autumn equinox and still visited the mountain months after the spring. Storms lasted for days and weeks at a time, drifts climbing up against the house and burying paths as deep as some trees grew high. Often the man had to wade for firewood or trudge out to his tool shed at the edge of the forest with a rope tied around his waist. But when the wind settled, the skies cleared, and the low sun shone again, the man would wrap the young girl warm and tight in a pack, walk out into the stillness of winter, and float on snowshoes made of ash limbs and rawhide down to the frozen lake, where the two would spend the day fishing for trout and perch through the ice. Snow covered so much of the girl's world from mountaintop to lake that for almost half the year, all she could see when she looked out the window was a landscape at rest beneath a blanket of white. And yet, no matter how long winter lasted, spring followed, its arrival soft and somehow surprising, like the notes of birdsong upon waking, or the tap of water dripping in a droplet from a branch to the ground. As the snow melted, black rocks, gray lichen, and brown leaf cover emerged from the once uniform palette of the forest floor, and the thin silvery outlines of trees began to brighten with leaves of green against the groupings of hemlock and pine. Those were the days when the girl left the house in the morning with her father and studied a new world that pushed up from the dirt of the forest and emerged from the water at the edge of the lake, days in which she lay on the ground beneath a warm sun and wondered if world and time itself were like the hawk and eagle soaring above her in long arcs she knew were only part of their flight. For they must have begun and returned to someplace as of yet unseen by her, someplace as of yet unknown. So.
Thank you both so much. Andrew, it's so interesting to me, having read your book in January and February of this year, just before the pandemic broke out in the United States, and being on the cusp of spring, that we never fully came to enjoy it this year. And Aimee, I loved your book and was so happy to read it. It was such a comfort this autumn as I was packing up and leaving Brooklyn to move to North Carolina, and wondering and marveling at the idea of returning back home to the South after several decades out of that area. I wanted to talk to you both, since we're all here today, to talk about the environment. How, and if you could both mention, discuss your relationship to the outdoors, maybe not so much even the environment, just your relationship to the outdoors, and how nature served as inspiration for your work. If Aimee, if you'd like to begin, please.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that reading, Andrew. I love, it makes me swoon over just anytime. It's so easy to write about loons, but it's hard to even write in just a way that I could almost hear it as well. People don't know what a loon sounds like. It just made me wistful for hearing that sound again. Anyway, yeah, gosh, Lauren, that's such a good question and a big question, you know, to answer in a giant essay, and I won't do that here, but I would just say, you know, as my book talks about, we moved around a lot. So the passage that I just read right now takes place in Western Kansas. My mother, she's retired now, but she was an incredible psychiatrist, and we would move and live in the grounds of these mental hospitals about every 4 years, and we would have these doctors' quarters. So most of the doctors did not have kids, and my mom was the exception. So it was a weird, wacky situation that I thought was normal then, but now looking back, I realized, oh, not everybody grew up with barbed wire in their yard. You know, we would always be, you know, and most of these places are shut down now, you know, but these mental hospitals or mental institutions were usually in very rural, very white towns. And yet it was kind of, before anybody starts to feel sorry for me, it was one of the most magical places to grow up, in that it was so safe. Like the security all around, everybody, you know, the campus security always knew where my younger sister and I were. So we kind of had giant fields and meadows and creeks to explore, because, and we didn't know this, but we were being surveilled all the time. And, you know, everybody kept special watch over the doctor's daughters. We were pretty much in the safest place we could ever imagine, you know. And then, you know, a football yard away, there was people, the criminally insane were kind of kept there behind 3 rows of barbed wire. So it was a weird way to grow up, but most of these places had plenty of room to roam. And so that was kind of my experience, is being outside. Nobody was asking me, for example, catalpa trees never asked me, what are you? Are you Portuguese? Or what, you know, that dreaded question of what I am, never asking me like, oh, what's your background? It's interesting, you know, it would just be just, what are you? You know, and that, even I was born in Chicago, you know, I grew up listening to Duran Duran and Madonna. I always was just, and I didn't have the words for it, but I always would feel othered, except when I was outside, because I could just be like catching crayfish or observe, you know, learning constellations, how they're different in Kansas as opposed to the suburbs of Phoenix and things like that. So I recognize that that's also a privileged position to take. I mean, I have some friends who are like, they do not feel comfortable at all being outside. You know, for them, forests represent their ancestors being hung from trees, you know, so I absolutely get that. And I can only just speak from my experience that being outside was a place of safety and delight for me. Yeah. Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, well, Aimee, actually, that I wanted to tell you that when my wife and I got this place in New Hampshire, the first night we drove up there with the kids to spend the night. We got there a little late, you know, after rush hour and everything, and the loons were going crazy on the lake, and my kids wouldn't get out of the car. They thought they were wolves. It was that loud. And I said, no, they're not wolves, they're loons, and they make that sound because they're happy.
Yeah, yeah.
So now the loons are pretty ubiquitous on Thorndike Pond, and they're quite something. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania in a small town called Dallas, west of Wilkes-Barre, and it was very rural. I lived on a dead-end street that wasn't paved until I was in middle school. My mother's father, who was a Slovak immigrant, fought in World War I for the Austrians against the Italians. He worked in the mines, but he bought this land in the back mountain. And so my mother, we built a house right next to the house my mother grew up in. And so she lived there her entire life. Wow. And we were outside all the time. We called it the Hill, and there were a few other houses, but it was pretty rural. And I mean, as I look back on it, it was just one notch shy of feral in many ways. You know, my parents were both white collar. My dad was a social worker, and he was World War II vet. You know, he learned how to use firearms and how to respect them in the Army. And so he hunted with my older brothers. There were 7 of us. But by the time he got to my younger brother and me, he just fished. He never took us hunting. We'd go shooting a lot, but no, not hunting. And so so fishing and just being outside. And my mother's father really took my father in and sort of kind of gave him that love for the woods. And it was just the woods. My mother would refer to it as the woods. And that's how we grew up. You know, there were bear and we fished. And so when I went off to college, you know, I spent a lot of time in cities, and I've you know, lived in New York and close to Washington. I've lived in, Moscow and Bratislava and places like that. And this past 10, 12 years coming back to Boston was really going back up to Jaffrey, New Hampshire, and finding this house that made me realize, wow, I'm a Pennsylvania boy. And my older brother, he always says, you can take the boy out of Pennsylvania, but you can't take the Pennsylvania out of the boy. And it was not a great place to grow up as a boy who wanted to read and do well in school. It was, you know, there was some bullying that went along, but my parents were really solid, and they're like, you got to stick to what you love and stick to what you know. And I promise you, if you do well in school, I'll let you go to whatever college you get into, and you can leave here. And I did leave there, and it was fantastic. My parents gave me that, and I've gone back there too. And that's the beauty of it, to come around. And if it wasn't for that, I never would have written The Bear. You know, sleeping out in the snow and eating potatoes in a fire, and, you know, walking home with a stringer of bass that my mom would cook up for lunch, because we were out since 5 in the morning fishing. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, for both of you, you grew up with that as part of this innate element of your life. And what do you think for people who don't have that, how can they access that? And how do you see it as something that writing offers that entry point or not? I was thinking also about the fact that, you know, you both sort of unsettle preconceived notions about how one writes about nature in a novel, in essays and poetry. It's not what we consider typical nature writing in the way that we think about Thoreau. And I think that that's a great thing to unsettle that. But because underneath it is such this deep respect. And so I was wondering if you guys could talk about who, you know, for you growing up, how you came to this notion of writing about nature, what access did you have to nature writing, how that should change, and how your work sort of creates a bridge for that to happen?
Such a good question. You know, I feel a little sheepish answering it. So I'll keep it short, but the honest truth is I came to nature writing fairly late. It wasn't until grad school. You know, and I read it. I mean, I was the kid, you know, my parents, they worked all the time, but two things they made sure of is that I always had access to libraries, and they would always, no matter how tired they were or whatever 70-hour week they had at the hospital, they would make sure to be outside with us on the weekend. And whether or not that was taking us hiking up Camelback Mountain in Arizona, or just spending all weekend long gardening with my mom, we were outside. And then there was books. So I never, and I'm really kind of just a big nerd, but I never liked children's literature as a kid. They would drop me off there in the kids section, and then I'd make my way to the adult section of nature or science. And I would just be on the floor paging through The Hunt for the Giant Squid, or The Secret Life of Ants, or, you know, whatever nonfiction and nature. So I was reading hungrily until the librarians flicked the lights off, basically. And I'm still that girl, you know, just I love reading about it. I love, so being outside and reading just set the stage for turning to wanting to write about this thing that I loved. And I've always tackled it in my poetry, but something happened for me in around 2016 where I had a lot more to say, and I did not want to be restricted by a line break or a stanza. And I just felt like I needed to unfurl or breathe out, exhale a little bit more into an essay. So I've been reading it for so long. But when I was a kid, I was never like, oh, I'm going to journal now, and this is one day going to be my great book, you know. But I was always looking, always observing, and taking note, like really taking note. I'm so glad. I always tell my own kids, I'm so glad that cell phones weren't around when I was a kid. I mean, like Andrew, we were out. I think of my the years. I was in Phoenix, Arizona, from ages about 8 through 12, so 4 years of just being outside from sunup till sundown. And that's in Arizona heat. They'd make us come in at like 2 in the afternoon because we would just scorch ourselves and get sunburned, you know. But otherwise, we were just outside. The minute we'd come home from school, we were outside again. And I don't know, that was just the best. So many writers I know now had childhoods like that, whether or not they write about the environment or not, but they just had that time to daydream, that time to wonder and kind of just think and notice, watch an ant crawl up the side of a cactus, you know, and an hour would pass, or, you know, and I would be okay with it. So I tease my kids now who are 13 and 10, you know, you need to find a way to be okay without electricity. You know what I mean? You don't need to have an outlet to charge up a phone for you to read or to, you know, so I love social media. I love all of that. But it was the biggest training to be a writer, was just the ability to be curious about this planet and to enjoy being outside without any hindrances.
seems like a different way to experience time too, and to sort of to measure time in terms of observation and not so much in terms of how to occupy oneself. And it's great training as a writer beyond reading, I think.
Yeah. And just one small little extra thing too is like, I know, hearing myself talk, I know that sounds almost just Pollyanna-ish and stuff. And there was definitely some dangers. I mean, that was around the time, I'm an 80s girl. I grew up in late 70s, 80s. There was a lot of kidnappings. So there was a lot of, you know, especially in the suburbs, of like missing young girls, for example, who'd vanished from bike rides. And my sister and I would just be on bike rides. My parents had no idea where we were. So there was definitely always that looming around. You know, we'd have McGruff the crime dog training sessions at school and things like that. But one thing I wanted to say is that now that, especially when my kids are younger, we go on walks, and all of their pockets and my pockets would be full of stuff, a bean or a rock shaped like Florida where their grandparents live. And so I wanted my book to be, like, you don't have to teach kids how to wonder or to appreciate the outdoors. They just, you know, do it on their own. So I wanted my book to be for the grownups who still have full pockets, but also for the grownups who forgot what it's like to have full pockets. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I'm going for with my relationship to the outdoors. Also, just a gentle remembering that you could have so much fun and have a different sense of time outdoors, at least mostly pre-pandemic, you know. Anyway, yeah, Andrew?
Yeah, so my time outdoors, well, like I said, it was pretty ubiquitous. You know, we'd be up in the morning, and when my father's car would pull in the driveway, and if we didn't see it, if we were like up on the mountain, he would shout and we would hear him. And if we didn't hear him and we were late for dinner, wow, we were told about it. So, but that coincided exactly with books. Like both my parents had advanced degrees, you know, thanks to the GI Bill from my dad, and my mom's father actually let her go to college because she got a full ride as a woman at College of Misericordia in Dallas. And so, like, my world is one of, on the outside, just trees and woods, and on the inside, just walls lined with books. And so the two things my mother would always say, if we were to say, you know, I'm bored, she remind us that the boredom is within us. And my kids hate it when I say that. The boredom is inside you. But she'd say, go outside. What's that?
Or only boring people are bored.
She never said that. She said the boredom is within you, which it seemed a little bit more therapeutic, actually. So, but she'd say, read a book or go outside. And listen, the boredom was real, I have to say, Aimee, you know, because, yeah, you know, I look back on it now and I see it as kind of just shy of a paradise, but wow, the boredom could be stultifying. My father would, you know, say, well, come on out, I need help weeding the garden. He had a huge garden, and I'd just be like, oh my God, you know, and do I have to do this? And so, but so there it is. And so for me, books in those two sort of parallel lanes of the highway, I'm outside all the time, but also my older brothers, I mentioned, my oldest brother was a marine biologist, studied at university, and he was like giving me Rachel Carson, and he was also a crazy science fiction fan. He would give me Edgar Rice Burroughs, and my sister was also a mad reader, and she was giving me J.D. Salinger and Jack Kerouac and all this stuff. I think maybe I read a Curious George book and then jumped right to J.D. Salinger, so, which is great. I don't remember any of the interim stuff, but then reading that kind of stuff and thinking, wow. And I also had a great friend at school. I'll give a shout out to Christine Kravitz here. Her father, Tom, was a gardener, and he hired me from the age of 14 to when I left to go to college at 18, just to work with him. And he had herb gardens, and he just taught me so much about the outdoors, plants you could eat. And Christine was another one, was just chucking books at me, you know, Aldous Huxley and you name it, and poetry too. So Aimee, I was first and foremost a poet, and that's where I started writing about nature. I just wanted to sort of find a way to take what I saw and what I loved about language, and poetry just seemed the place for that to happen. And my first book of poems was a book of poems. I think I mentioned to Anna Thorne that I was in the creative writing program at Columbia for poetry back in the late 80s. But I love writing poetry, and I think I might have another book in me, but I just found that the measure of a sentence actually freed me more than the line break.
Mm.
And it just happens. I don't know. I was lucky to have discovered that. But what didn't break was this sense of, okay, I'm still looking at the world. And there's a quality of that looking out that I've always tried to capture. And it was in The Signal Flame, my second novel, which is my Pennsylvania novel. I was just writing about Darden, Pennsylvania, which is the fictional town that's, loosely Dallas, where I grew up. And I just put myself, I'll tell you, here's a story. I was trying to figure out why it wasn't sort of lifting off the page for me mid composition. And I was reading my kids' Watership Down out loud. And I was really fascinated by that. So it's such a great story. And I was thinking like, wow, look at the way he gets all the plants, all the landscape and everything. And I'm thinking, how does he do that? What's he doing? And it occurred to me one night, I was like, rabbits. What do rabbits see? They see exactly what's in front of them, and they live entirely in the now. And I'm like, go back to your head in Pennsylvania, relive those entire 18 years and be a rabbit. Take that perspective. And all of a sudden the book just took off for me from the level of writing about nature. And so the Bear is in many ways part two of that, which is to say, when I thought of the man and the girl and realized I'd started writing about them living off the land, living close to the land, before I realized that the narrative really was about the last two left. But that closeness to nature didn't disappear. In fact, it really took kicked it up a notch higher. And so I look for that, and I look for it now in prose writing. Aimee, I wonder if you have a thought on this. I've actually been on a sort of a campaign, what I call against interiority. There's something of the Dostoevsky and inside the head interior monologue of fiction that I think is fine, but I think too much of it it's done too easily, just to pop inside a character's head, have him or her make a moral decision and pop out again. What about just looking entirely outward and being entirely given a view of nature, whether it's a small town in Pennsylvania or Kansas or a vision of a mountain at the end of humanity's string of time. And, I think the closest that someone comes to that is Cormac McCarthy with his characters. He seems to be against interiority. And in fact, I've heard he doesn't like Henry James at all because of that. And if you read the Border trilogy, John Grady Cole will look out at the Animus Peaks and the snow and the distance, and then he makes his decision. He's not thinking it through. He's just acting, but he's still a morally complex character. I just love that. So from poetry to prose, always trying to find two things in that intersection between the now, nature and now. So I feel like that's what I want to do as a nature writer. And also too, I'm sort of against the post-apocalyptic. I think a lot of nature writing is about the downside of it and how much we're making a mess of it. We are making a bloody mess of it. The Earth's going to be fine. The question is, what's humanity going to do? And so I think reminding, if there's any way, I mean, if two people read my book and they say, wow, it's really, you've made nature look quite beautiful, I want to say yes, because it is beautiful, and you'll respect it more and want to go back to it. And Lauren, search it out if it has that element of beauty. Mm-hmm. So taking that sort of non-fictive lens and putting it into fiction, I think that's something, and it's something we ought to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's sort of what I was trying to get at too in the question, is sort of how, for people who don't have that kind of access, who didn't have the childhood that you had, how do you offer that through your writing as a lens to have an acute sense of observation, to find that beauty wherever you are, be it, kind of an artificial garden or park, or in a small plot of land, or, and by land, I mean like a tiny little piece next to your sidewalk in front of a building in New York City. How do you allow people to have access to that? And what is it that they could gain from having that sense of wonder and observation that they don't otherwise find, and kind of offer that to other people? And I think that's what separates your books from others, is this kind of engagement with nature and observation, and pulling that in and allowing others to access that. But
yeah, absolutely. I think too, Andrew, you mentioned Rachel Carson, who's one of my heroes. And I'm going to butcher this, but she says like the more that we get to know about plants and animals, that we we share life on this planet, the less appetite we have for destruction. So one thing is, I want to start with love. What I feel kind of guilty saying it because I've only been here in the South for 4 years, but there's a Southern saying, you catch more flies with honey. And, and there's definitely books that say, here's the gloom and doom and the warnings. We need to be vigilant. I get that. And those are super important. That's just not what I wanted to do with this book. I wanted to start with a place of love. I wanted to name creatures and animals that don't always get heard, as well as some familiar ones like a monarch butterfly, but maybe you don't know about an axolotl or a narwhal. And I'm hoping that once you put names on things, kind of like Rachel Carson, you'll have less of an appetite for destruction for them. It's easy to say, oh, let's clear that patch of forest. But when you realize that, oh no, there's birds in there, there's warblers in there that depend on the stars to fly home, and you actually get to know their names and this shade of blue, maybe you don't want to cut that patch of forest down anymore, and then conversely, you realize, oh, there's actually a little boy in Mississippi named Ramon who likes to have his bangs moved to the side by his mother, who works at a chicken processing plant. Maybe you'll not want to snitch and call ICE on them, which actually happened, and they were separated last summer here in Mississippi. So it's easy to say, oh, we're gonna round up that. When you depersonalize things, when you don't have names for these things, it's easy to kind of turn your eye to violence. But when you actually realize, oh, these are living, breathing creatures and we're all connected.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll just pause and do something, So what that something is, it's like what you were saying, Andrew, is that we get to know Cormac's characters by what they do. And I love that as well. Like what you see in a book on nature is a very political statement. What's there and what's also not there. The silences are also important too. Like you get to know how these characters feel about the outdoors by virtue of their actions. Actions, after all, actions speak louder than words, So I think trusting in the reader to kind of make that journey along with you. As a reader myself, I love that because it's like I get to make my own choices and make my own judgments rather than have them spoon-fed to me, that kind of thing. Yeah. And right now I want that more than ever. I want to be able to have some, I feel like there's so much spoon-fed to us on the news and social media. I want to be able to get lost in a story, to travel a little bit without ever leaving my chair, and also feel like I can make those judgments on my own about, oh, is this a villain character? Is this a hero who's super flawed, but I want to see him succeed? That kind of thing. Actions speak louder than words. So I think just trusting in the reader to kind of make those connections, I think really works well.
There was
the age. Oh, go on. Sorry.
I was going to say, during the pandemic times, the COVID times, the New York Times has done a really great job of sort of throwing out every now and then essays or op-eds about things like, growing plants on your rooftop, or how to find a place of water where you can swim, or just think about the cleanliness of water. And I think that may be a place to start. I mean, I feel somehow, it's a privilege to have been raised in the environment and outside, as difficult as it was. But, I also realize there's a certain amount of privilege to be able to get to it. Not everybody can get to it. And maybe I think that's, Lauren, I don't have an answer to that specifically, but I hope that there are readers who will move from a book to their actual plot, let's just say their plot of land, wherever that is, however big that is, or whatever it is, and think about, you know, the life, you know, that's almost, Aimee, it's almost like characters. What's the dramatis personae of this land that I've got in front of me? How can I make it come to life, give it some action, as you say? So, but I think in your question, it just makes me think more about, what is there a role here other than just being a storyteller? I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of what you're saying too, from what I'm gleaning from what you're both saying, is something to the effect of this developing a different sense of time by allowing oneself to be outside and immersed in the world around you, and really having to focus on a deeper sense of observation gives you a greater sense of agency in recognizing through nature what's possible. If you allow yourself the time in the way that nature takes its time, you begin to see how there's a different way to measure time than merely episodes or periods of engagement, or, you know, a schedule, or, you know, that I feel like children are so heavily scheduled these days is another thing that I think about a lot. And that we're all beholden to timers and reminders. And so allowing yourself to have that opportunity, even if it's within a city, even if it's outside of kind of a natural environment, you as writers are kind of granting readers this ability to become more active in their own lives in that way.
It's, Lauren, when you mentioned time, you know, I think, I actually think I might have spoken with you about this previously, but the idea of ordinary time isn't necessarily simple mundane time. It's from the Latin ordinal, the counting down. And it depends on what you're counting down towards, but I've always loved that, and I get that from you know, from just being raised a Eastern European Catholic, that there's times of feast and there's times of you know, repentance, but then there's just ordinary time, and it's green time. That's the time of greenness, and I've always loved that idea of counting down, and living in ordinary time has always been my favorite time. So
definitely, I just read something in the New York Times that there's a community people, kind of the Arctic Circle, who see time not as running out but as coming to you. And I thought, oh wow, I have to adapt that. So I just wanted to bring that up with everyone as well.
I'm terrible with winters, so maybe that's how they're starting up there, is that they have a whole different mindset. For me, I'm already like here in Oxford, it's already so dark, and I imagine, in Boston, and it's even more so. But I'm a summer gal, so the change, even just the changing of the time, is so hard on me. Yeah, you know, and hopefully our books are, you know, kind of encourage people to kind of look at their own neighborhoods. I know we're in a pandemic right now too, so that's also a problem. But, you know, for example, this is an organization that is fairly new to me, but there's Outdoor Alliance for Kids, where, you know, where you could help now. And if you're in a position where you can do so, you can actually help send kids to have these field trips outside, kids who wouldn't normally have access to that. Here in Mississippi, we have Delta Wind Birds, which is a bird watching group, you know, and maybe you can help a local organization to get them to do some community minded things, so that you yourself, if, you know, for whatever reason, if you can't be out there yourself, you can help organizations that already are in place without inventing the wheel again, you know.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting too. I was thinking about you're embracing kind of this notion of love for the environment and wonder with your book, and Andrew also as well, thinking about your book, how it would be very easy to categorize it as a dystopic novel, but through the way that you frame it, the perspective that you take, and the way that you allow the environment to kind of assume this role within the book, it's just such a powerful way of reframing one's engagement with the environment. And so I think for both of you, from your books, I'm trying to think of different moments at which that was really most present for me. But I think that that's such an important thrust for all of us to take away, is that it's easy to be overwhelmed by the state of the environment right now. And rather than let that defeat you and feel and create a disengagement with it, rather to create an engagement through writing, but also your own personal experience with nature. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the bear and sort of how that plays into it in terms of sense of empowerment, because in your book, I don't think it's giving much away that we're looking at kind of the end of humanity. And
Right.
there's a young girl who's possibly the last human alive. And so, and I think also, Aimee, I mean, in some ways, your book as well, just this beautiful way of taking these simple, not simple, but I mean, the way that you do it is so perfect because it does come across as very simple, but it is very complicated, the way that you engage on a personal level in each of your essays. So I don't know, that just in terms of moving forward with writing and in nature to kind of engage with others and hopefully create a deeper sense of what it means to be a nature lover, rather than let that be something that is removed from people, others.
I think one thing that really was a catalyst for me to write The Bear was, and with respect to looking out at the environment, was, you know, in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, it's not the Canadian Rockies, it's not the Alps, it's not the Tetons, but every time I go there, I'm surprised by something, and surprised to the point of saying, "Huh, wow, I had no." That sort of knocks me down a peg. And this idea of that we humans think that we're at the top, we're we're like apex predators for everything except a virus, obviously, right? But that there's a real sort of hubris that we will persist, we will go on, we'll always be around, and I just don't think that's healthy at all. And so couching the novel, hitting on this note of human extinction, really made me think about, okay, if that's what you're going to do, then you really have to take it to the every note has to hit that scale, that key signature. And it made me think about the father and the girl, but also the way in which they live each day in the now, moment by moment, season by season. Time is entirely set by the moon, the stars, the sun, the seasons. And there is no hubris. They know that they could be snuffed out in a moment, but they live with the joy for being a part of the environment. And I think if there were one thing that I wanted to capture, it would be that. If we could sort of just stop and look without thinking that we're the boss or that we've got it all together. You know, sleep out in the snow one night and you'll see how quickly you're like, wow, this is not easy. I could leave this earth tonight from all kinds of various reasons. And you wake up in the morning and you're cold, but you get on with it and do that for a week. And you'd be like, wow, all right, now it's a whole nother game. So
I love how, Aimee, you talk about corpse flower as a means for, singling out finding your husband. I thought that was an incredible essay. And I love that it's a challenge to see who's going to step up and see that as something to embrace and something to be fascinated by rather than repelled.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a seemingly silly thing, but it was actually so easy to do,
more people should do that with online dating, perhaps. I don't know if that would help, but
yeah, what Lauren's referring to is I make a joke on my essay. It's not a joke, it actually happened. When I was single and I was researching corpse flowers, I didn't know exactly what for. I knew I wanted to write about them. I thought they were going to be for poems. I didn't know it was going to be this book. But you could tell within 5 minutes of talking on a first date, the question of like, what are you interested in? If I start talking about the corpse flower, I could know within 5 minutes if there was going to be a second date or not. Not because the person has to be interested, a potential mate has to necessarily be interested in what I do. I don't want to date myself. But if they had no questions about just the planet or curiosity about anything, it was easy to, how shall we say, like separate the wheat from the chaff. I joke with my friends, if you're at someone's house and there's no books around, like leave. Like that's an easy dating litmus test. If for me it just happened to be the corpse flower, the stinkiest flower on the planet. If you had no interest or no questions at all on that, bye. There's no second date. And yeah, it's without spoiling it, I mentioned in the very, very quickly, the man I eventually married and who's now the father of my children was not just fascinated by the corpse flower. He researched and made sure that I knew where corpse flowers were blooming so we could go on a road trip for them. And yeah.
Wow.
So, anyway, I wanted to show that not all nature writing is so serious and dour, and
Yeah.
fun to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love fish. I love to read novels or just works about fishing, because people who fish and write about it just love it.
Yeah,
About
absolutely.
bums and these guys who are just on the water all the time. There's nothing like it.
Yeah. I want humans to be curious about something else besides humans. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
And yeah, it's really, it says a lot about them. But I think it's not too late to change them. I mean, it's not like they're a lost cause. I personally had no interest in dating anybody like that. But so anyway, read widely is what I would recommend for your dating life.
Definitely. On that note, I want to encourage people briefly, we don't have much time left, if they want to send us some questions, but we did have a question, Andrew, about books about the environment and New Hampshire, if you have any that.
Yeah, there is a book. The author's name escapes me now, but it's called Bobcat Before Breakfast, and it's way long out of print, possible to get, only used copies. I have one that I paid dearly for, and I've seen them for upwards of $100-$200 for a copy. But Bobcat Before Breakfast, and it's exactly about that Monadnock region by a man who was a trapper. And he talks about like growing up in the region and being an outdoorsman, fighting in World War II, or being inducted into the army and coming back and doing it in the late 40s, but stopped trapping, and then was teaching at UNH for a while. And Schloss, I believe. John is his first name. I wish I could remember. It begins with an A. But if you check out Bobcat Before Breakfast.
Yeah.
Did you have it, Lauren?
And I was going to put it in the chat for us if people want to look it up.
Just a fantastic book, really. So that's one that comes to mind immediately. And also too, about the environment, I have to say I reread Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire, 1963. That book does not age at all. It's an amazing book. Talk about and he's a cranky old guy, cranky young guy at the time in 1963, but he sees, and you have to respect his perspective. So those are two I'd throw out there.
Yeah. Aimee, did you discover anything about Mississippi and Mississippi writing when you were in the 4 years or so that you've been down there? Oh
yeah, I mean, I realized that I live in a state with such a deep and illustrious literary history. The town that Faulkner made famous. And there's and living writers too that are just changing the face of contemporary literature as well. We've got Jesmyn Ward and Kiesi Lehman, and but we have Eudora Welty, and I mean, half my colleagues, all my colleagues here at the University of Mississippi. I mean, people come here, Michael Ferris Smith, Lee Durkee, people I think don't realize how much literary Mississippi is a good place to be a writer, because not only do they, I know the reputation is like, oh, we're last in education, that kind of thing, but it is a great place where they celebrate writers, where most towns have bookstores, in Oxford in particular. Bookstore here, Square Books. It's kind of the center. It's the buzz. It's the electricity of our town square. My sons go trick-or-treating at the famous house from A Rose for Emily, which is very spooky.
Wow.
And as an English major nerd myself, it's so surreal to have that. A very nice family lives there now. So it's just, I'm in awe and excited. The bar is so high for contributing to the state's great literary history. Yeah.
Definitely.
I would throw in Galway Canal's flower herding on Mount Monadnock. Canals in general, his collected poems came out a couple years ago. Edward Hirsch edited it.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic, certainly read as Frost, but he's a different Bobcat altogether. Galway Canal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, she's in Vermont, and it was in Vermont, but I always think when I spent time in New Hampshire of Grace Paley protesting the coroner at Dartmouth's Green during the Second Gulf War. So another person who may not necessarily seem like, and definitely someone of the city, but such an amazing observer of human nature and how one engages within one's environment. So.
Yeah. Are there other questions coming through for us?
I'm looking to see. I'm not seeing so many, but
no questions too big, too small.
I know. Trying to think if there's anything else, guys. I mean, I think that what you've touched upon is so important. I think that it's also, yes, seeing where you are and not confining yourself to the limitations of other people's expectations of where you are is something that's always important to reframe and to question. So yeah, just because Mississippi has this reputation is not in any way something that people should step back and not take it seriously. And I think also exploring and being curious about all regions of the United States rather than, and we're talking about the United States, it's not just the world. I mean, but speaking domestically, and especially now as we're all somewhat homebound, like to take another look at where you are and try to challenge yourself to learn something new about where you are and see if that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to encourage everyone to please check out these books. They're such a gift, and I think that you all will find something to just latch onto and will propel you to go out and take a keener look at the world around you.